What it do, cuckolds? It's your boy the Hater, and it's time, finally, for the Triple H Mega Rant. All right, now in this Mega Rant, we're going to talk about Triple H only in his capacity as a booker. So let me say a few things to get it out of the way about Triple H as a wrestler. Triple H is obviously a good wrestler. Nobody can doubt that. However, as a wrestler, he was always a bit overrated by himself, right? The reality is that Triple H, in the Attitude Era and beyond, he was on the level of like Chris Jericho, basically, right? He was on that level. He was not a big star like The Rock or Stone Cold. He was never really as over as The Undertaker or even Kane, right? He wasn't as charismatic as The Big Show. He didn't have a lot of the attributes that were necessary to be an excellent wrestler. But he was a good, oftentimes great wrestler, right? In the ring, Triple H was awesome. He mostly looked the part. Let's not forget there were like several time periods where Triple H was like a fat fuck, you know what I mean? Like, he had like his belly hanging over his underwear. He wasn't a believable main eventer, you know what I mean? But beyond those few times, Triple H obviously has contributed a lot to the WWE and the WWF. But people like Jericho, for example, have continued to do so way more than Triple H. Like by 2009, Triple H was pretty much done. I mean, let's be real. Like, he had like a few matches here and there, but he was kind of wrapping it up. You know what I mean? He was like having his Undertaker matches eventually. He was doing that kind of stuff, right? Like 2009 and a little bit beyond that, you know what I mean? He was having like his authority figure transition, right? He wasn't really a big deal, whereas Jericho, you know, had like the best run during that time. Like pretty much Triple H's career, as far as I'm concerned, ends when like DX reunites, right? That's like the end of his like main event career. But anyways, Jericho, on the other hand, then went on to AEW and has done other things. So in other words, what I'm getting at here is that Triple H isn't the big star that The Rock and Stone Cold are, and he's not really the wrestler that someone like Jericho or Kurt Angle is either, right? He's somewhere in between, but obviously a very high-level performing athlete. Like, if Triple H was around today in his prime, he would have like a Roman Reigns level career, right? He's like on that level, on the Roman Reigns level. Not really quite a star, but, you know, someone that would be a star today. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the real problem here. Triple H's run so far as a booker. In order to get to the heart of the matter with this Mega Rant up in this piece, cuckolds, we have to look back to even before Triple H became like the booker of WWE once Vincent Kennedy McMahon stepped down. This story begins with Triple H taking the reins of NXT. Now, immediately I started disliking Triple H as a booker. The primary reason is this. Triple H just went on a signing binge, right? He would sign everybody. Now, some of the people that he signed deserve to be signed, right? And in many ways, someone can argue that these people, if they were signed just a little bit earlier, like Eric Young, like Bobby Roode, maybe even Samoa Joe, right? If these guys were signed like 5-6 years before, they could have been massive stars, especially the likes of Bobby Roode, right? Because this guy was like the next Triple H, but more charismatic, and quite honestly, always had a better physique, and in my opinion, he's just as good in the ring, right? But Triple H also, in signing all the people that he signed a lot of jobbers, right? So his influence began way before. So a lot of the stuff that Vince McMahon gets blamed for, all the product is going downhill, are a direct consequence of Triple H taking the reins over who gets signed, who gets put in NXT, and subsequently, who gets promoted to the main roster. Now, some of these things are not Triple H's fault, right? WWE, for example, has always been on the lookout for the next big luchador. So they got Sin Cara, who was a massive star, and they thought maybe we can make him into the next Rey Mysterio. Obviously, they were wrong, but it is worthwhile to try, right? But there were some scenarios where Triple H, his mistakes are unforgivable. The 3 examples that come to mind, let's put 4 up in this bitch, are Nakamura, Sami Zayn, Cucky Owens, and of course, let's not forget Hideo Itami. The first time I saw Hideo Itami, I'm like, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, did they sign this guy without ever seeing him? I'm like, this guy's like 5'5", random ass looking dude. He has like two muscles in his whole body. He can't speak English, right? He doesn't look the part. He can't act the part. He can't do anything, right? And then they sign him and they pretend that he's going to be this massive superstar. And it's like anyone that's ever watched wrestling saw him and was like, wow, it looks like Shannon Moore would beat the shit out of this guy in 30 seconds. And Shannon Moore was a jobber, so what do we expect from this guy? But anyways, that's neither here nor there. Because even the people that got pushed under Triple H's reign, right? All those people ended up being liabilities, not contributors. Now, of course, I know that Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn have sold the occasional t-shirt for the WWE. But the reality is that that stuff simply is not enough, right? They did not become stars. And as a matter of fact, this is where we kind of start getting to Triple H and his kind of like reign of terror number 2, if you will, right? Where he systematically started burying other wrestlers in the tail end of his career and started promoting people that suck ass, right? And we see this happening up until today. I'll never forget it. There was this thing, it was a random ass Raw interaction. I'm sure a lot of people will remember this as I narrated, right? Chris Masters had just come back and he clearly had been off the steroids for a while because he was like 50, 60 pounds less. Like he was like visibly smaller. And he's like, I'm thinking about writing a book on how to become leaner. And Triple H was like, is the book called How to Lose 50 Pounds in 2 months? Right? And he just completely verbally buried him. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Chris Masters was going to be this massive megastar, right? Chris Masters had a fun little gimmick, but he didn't have the other qualities. Like he's not charismatic. He's never going to be a star. But for what he was, he deserved a little bit of a push, right? And he got one a little bit. He was decent in the ring, relatively speaking, right? He had an innovative finisher for the time. You know what I mean? Like nobody was using full Nelsons for the last like 20, 30 years by that point, right? And more importantly, it's like if you compare him to the likes of Hideo Itami, right? Or Kevin Owens or Sami Zayn, at the very least, you can make a point, right? You can make an argument that just put by visuals alone, the first time you see Chris Masters, you think to yourself, there is a non-zero chance this guy could be a megastar, right? When you see Kevin Owens, you think there is a 0 chance that this guy could be a megastar. It's just never going to happen, right? Anybody that knows anything knows. It's just not going to happen, right? It probably wasn't going to happen with Chris Masters, but it is what it is. At least he deserves a chance. Additionally, Triple H continued to do this with the female wrestlers, right? This is even more egregious if you ask me. Triple H was behind, largely, China, right? Triple H and Shawn Michaels are what made China popular. They're the ones that got her over with DX, right? And China is like an excellent wrestler considering her limitations, right? China has the look, China is believable, and China became an Intercontinental Champion. The only female to hold the real Intercontinental title before they throw us the Women's Intercontinental title coming to you soon, probably, right? So the fact of the matter is that China and the likes of China were pushed away. Instead, the WWE started looking for wrestlers like Sasha Banks. Basically people that are never going to draw a dime and that essentially suck, right? This also includes the likes of Charlotte, who basically, if it weren't for the fact that she's Ric Flair's daughter, she would have no personality at all. Like Charlotte has 0 personality. She's one of the worst personalities of all time. Her personality is basically, she just does a few of the things that her father, who has like one of the greatest personalities of all time, would do. So these are some of the things that happened with Triple H before he even was like the head booker, right? Before the things fell onto him. Now, Vince McMahon obviously has oversight over this, but the idea is as follows, right? If the people that are being signed are jobbers, the people that are going to be promoted are also going to be jobbers, right? A few of them might stick it through, like Roman Reigns, Dean Ambrose to a much lower extent, and Seth Rollins to an extent as well, were able to become quasi-main eventers, except for Roman Reigns, who obviously is a main eventer, right? But the reality is, a lot of people that were not Triple H guys, or seemingly were not Triple H guys, they were not indie darlings, they got no chance at all, right? So for example, if you were to compare the hundreds of chances, basically, that Cesaro got to get over versus like the 3 chances that Rusev got to get over, despite the fact that 2 of those 3 chances he actually got over, it's unreasonable, right? So people are like, oh, Vince McMahon didn't know how to use Cesaro. Cesaro got like 100 opportunities to get himself over and never really did. He had the Cesaro section thing, but that's not going to be enough to make you a main eventer. It should be enough to give you a small push, and he got his small pushes, right? Cesaro was on TV all the time, but it didn't matter who you put him in the ring with. The other guy was always more interesting, whether that is his opponent, whether that is Tyson Kidd, or whether that is Sheamus. You know, Cesaro was always the other guy. Rusev, on the other hand, was excited to be there. He'd come out, jump, act like a maniac, you know, but he never got any opportunities. There's other examples that we can give beyond Cesaro, obviously, and beyond the big man, Big Rusev, right? Think about all the other people that cannot be correctly classified as Triple H guys that basically didn't get even one opportunity to kind of get themselves over. Some of these guys are like big, strong guys that should have had at least one quasi-push, right? Mason Ryan, remember him, cuckolds? Never got an opportunity at all, right? That's just a silly example. I understand that it's not the greatest example of all time, but the point stands that a lot of people that were not indie jobbers didn't get the same opportunities that the indie jobbers got. You know what I mean? And that is inexcusable. This also goes back to like the return of Lashley, but more on that in a little bit. You know what I'm saying? But the facts are the facts. Triple H continued in NXT and other situations to push forward these indie midgets. Maybe Triple H, not maybe, I guess that's the only explanation, is that Triple H must have thought to himself, well, I mean, you know, these guys are indie darlings, so maybe they'll bring some fans. This would suggest that they're good, etc., right? Maybe we'll hire Austin Aries, who's never drawn a damn dime in his entire career, and see what he does, right? But what about other people that weren't indie darlings that deserved more, right? Enzo Amore, Big Cass, how many opportunities did they get? They got one opportunity, they got over, then they were fired, basically, right? I understand not everyone's going to get the same amount of opportunities. I get that. And I'm not saying they should, right? We have people and we have hierarchies and there are elements of luck. But how about once in a while, push some of the wrestlers in NXT that actually are over and are interesting, right? The problem is you sign a bunch of people that aren't interesting and then you kind of have to go with them because, you know, you have like 10 of them and you have one guy who is interesting and then that guy needs to be put to the wayside, right? My opinion, for example, Eric Young deserves more of an opportunity than Samoa Joe at that stage of their careers. Samoa Joe, we've seen everything he's done 100 times. Eric Young keeps reinventing himself, keeps doing fun things, right? But not to Triple H. To Triple H, he's got his favorites, and that's the people you're going to see. Those are the ones that are going to get put on Vince's desk, and therefore, those are the ones that Triple H is going to request are pushed because they're the ones that he signed. But think about all the failures, right? Think about all the abject failures. I'm not talking about small-time failures. I don't think Nakamura got like a small amount of money. He's a big deal, you know, in New Japan. He could have gotten a big deal from them. So I'm sure, you know, WWE had to compete to a certain degree. They paid him a good amount of money. Bobby Roode, right? All these other guys. And some of them are good. I'm not saying they're all garbage. But you understand the point I'm trying to make. The point that I'm trying to make is that Triple H clearly has his favorites and he has his opinions. And one trend that I've noticed is, and I hate to say it, and this is why I started out with a small little review of Triple H's career. You can never make an argument that anyone that Triple H has pushed is better than Triple H. Now, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist because he is running a business, but no reasonable person would ever argue that Kevin Owens or Sami Zayn is better than Triple H. And again, I'm not saying, absolutely not. I'm not saying that, you know, fucking Mason Ryan is better than Triple H. But you can make an argument, right? He's bigger and stronger looking than Triple H, right? He has at least one attribute where he is superior to Triple H. Same thing with Chris Masters. Chris Masters' physique was superior to Triple H's at their peaks, right? But Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn and Hideo Itami and Nakamura have nothing that is better than Triple H. Nothing, not one element, right? And maybe, again, I'm not saying he's doing this on purpose because that would be very, very small. But the idea is Triple H clearly has always had an attitude about people that might be better than him, but that he doesn't think are better than him, right? This was even created into a small storyline with Booker T. Now, the reality is that in the context of WWE, Triple H is better than Booker T, right? Triple H at that point was a solid main eventer, and Booker T was just coming in from the little leagues. That's how it was presented. The fact that WCW was also the big leagues was toned down, right? They lost the battle, at Survivor Series, and they were seen as the inferior brand by virtue of the fact that Vince bought WCW, right? You can't just deny that. And that's another thing. A lot of people they like to rewrite history. The reality is that the Booker T's and Diamond Dallas Pages of the world, right, likely due to bad management, but doesn't matter. They weren't able to beat the likes of Val Venus and The Rock. So we have to be honest about it, right? Some of them are great, but some of them aren't. Booker T is obviously one of the great ones, right? And the reality is, and again, this is just a storyline. I don't believe Triple H is a racist and all that other stupid shit, right? But the storyline is essentially that Triple H doesn't think Booker T is quite up to par. But I personally believe, because that's been a storyline for Triple H with everybody, right? With Randy Orton, with Batista, with The Rock, with Undertaker, with Stone Cold. That's always been the story. Triple H thinks he's better than everybody. But with Booker T, it's like Booker T is supposed to be below Triple H on the card. Understandably so, he came from the other company. But there are clear situations where Booker T is better than Triple H. They're both believable tough guys. They both have great physiques. But I would say that Booker T edges Triple H out on charisma, and he edges him out on the most important factor that we never talk about for some reason, entertainment value. Booker T is more entertaining. And as a result, Triple H doesn't like entertaining wrestlers because they will appear better than him. That's the only explanation I can think of. That's why the likes of Cesaro, right, get pushed. That's why the likes of Rusev get buried. That's why people that, everyone that Triple H doesn't like is better than Triple H at something, right? It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. Same thing with Lashley, right? Lashley is nearly 50, looks great, so does Triple H, but Lashley can still wrestle, right? Lashley can still wrestle, and in real life, he could kick Triple H's ass. So I understand the logic of Triple H thinking fuck Lashley, I'm going to push Kevin Owens instead. It's like, how stupid do you have to be? You have to be retarded. You have to be retarded. If you took 10 people from Africa, 10 people from Europe, 10 people from Asia, and none of these people ever watched wrestling, and you showed them one wrestling match. Let's say you showed them, Edge versus Matt Hardy versus Eddie Guerrero. Sorry, Christian versus Matt Hardy versus Eddie Guerrero for the European title at Unforgiven or some shit, right? You just show them that so they know what a wrestling match is. Then you show them Lashley and Kevin Owens, and you ask these people who never watch wrestling, who would you rather see wrestle? 100% of them are going to say Lashley. Not one person is going to pick Kevin Owens because people are not retarded. So the idea that you have a potential megastar like Lashley and you have someone like Kevin Owens and you think Kevin Owens is a bigger deal, that cannot be explained by anything other than favoritism. And that's fine. Everyone's got their favorites. If I were running WWE, Christian, I should say, would have been a multiple-time champion. Eric Young would have had a few opportunities, right? And Nakamura would have been fired. And I understand that not everyone agrees with me, and not everyone's going to agree with Triple H. Most of us don't agree with Triple H. But it is evident to your boy in this mega rant that Triple H does play favorites. You know what I mean? There are people that got basically zero opportunities. There was this wrestler called Eric Escobar. Remember him? He was Vicky Guerrero's boyfriend that she met on vacation in Mexico or something, right? This guy got one match and he was gone. Kazarni got one match and he was gone, right? It's just give people one opportunity, man. You've hired them, you've pushed them, give them an opportunity. Every other person that's been pushed during this time is a clear Vince McMahon type of guy, right? Big, strong, charismatic, unique look. You know what I mean? Del Rio, Sheamus, those people, right? John Cena, Randy Orton. This is before Triple H had the reins, right? Where Vince McMahon had an eye for talent. You can say whatever you want. Triple H, I cannot believe, basically, that Triple H doesn't have an eye for talent. Because if I have an eye for talent, and you have an eye for talent, how does Triple H, the guy that's been in this business forever, not have an eye for talent, right? Think about it. Think about it for a second. Triple H has always had his favorites. You know the little story about Evolution where they're Mark Jindrak doesn't fit in Evolution? Yes, he does. He fits perfectly fine. He's just he's another Randy Orton. Now, he didn't end up becoming a megastar, but of course he fits in. Of course he fits in. And the idea that he doesn't, to me, screams of like Triple H and Ric Flair type of nepotism. They like their guys, and it's their faction, so I get it. But what about when it's time for you to run the company? Which brings us to this most recent run of Triple H. This part of the rant, which in my opinion is the main event of the rant, cannot be started or concluded or continued unless we start with one point, and that is the artificial design of what is called the new era, the Paul Levesque era. There's a point where Triple H went from Triple H to Paul Levesque. He had been Paul Levesque, as we just explained, for several years before, but now it's his. It's in the palm of his dumbass hand. And what has he done? Well, a couple of things. Number one, nobody has gotten over. It's been nearly a year. Not one new person has gotten over. The only exception you can think of is Gunther. What does Gunther have in common with the pattern that we have been talking about now? Well, no reasonable person could ever say that Gunther is better than Triple H at anything. Obviously, Gunther's not better than Triple H in the ring. That's just retarded. Gunther does like 5 moves, and he does the 5 worst versions of each of those moves. Think about it. The worst powerbomb you can ever imagine, the worst clothesline you can ever imagine, by far the worst top rope splash you could ever imagine, the worst sleeper hold you can ever imagine, and like the worst chops you could ever imagine. This guy does everything terribly. So he's not better than Triple H in the ring. It goes without saying that Gunther's charisma is basically 0. So Triple H's 7 out of 10 charisma is sufficient to be superior to Gunther's. And then obviously, in terms of their presentation, their physique, and their look, it goes without saying. For better or for worse, Triple H, when he is in shape, there are a few people that have a better physique than Triple H in shape. Very few, right? There's some that are comparable, like The Rock when he was like in wrestling all the time, Booker T, like I said, Stone Cold to some extent. Then there's people that have superior physiques like Cena, Batista, Orton, you know what I mean? Like there's other people as well. Lesnar, you know, Lashley. But it's very, very hard to find someone with a physique like Triple H. And Gunther doesn't have it. And obviously, Triple H is obviously a good-looking guy. So it goes without saying that he's better looking than Gunther. You know what I mean? So Gunther fits the mold. He fits the lesser than Triple H mold. So he gets the push, right? Damian Priest doesn't fit the mold, so he gets buried, right? Meanwhile, other Triple H projects like Finn Balor, like Kevin Owens, like Sami Zayn, and somewhere in there we have Nakamura, still have jobs, despite the fact that continuously do nothing. A few months ago, Kevin Owens' gimmick was, I've done nothing for a while, and I don't deserve anything. Since that time, he's lost a few matches, and now all of a sudden he's still on pay-per-view. This guy hasn't won a match in like a year and a half. Nobody gives a fuck about him. I understand that the first night of WrestleMania doesn't count as a main event, but the facts are the facts. They're trying to make it count. And the main event was the Usos versus Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. Imagine if you hadn't seen WrestleMania in 5-6 years, and you tune in thinking this is the main event because you don't know it's two nights. And you see this match. You see these fucking personalities, these bodies in the ring, these fat fucks, these out-of-shape losers. And you're like, are you shitting me? Are you shitting me? Are you fucking insane? We went from Rock and Stone Cold to Sami Zayn and Jimmy Uso? Have you lost your minds? This is all a Triple H creation, right? He already had his fingers in the pie. And this can be seen now by the continuation of the same shit. Now, let's talk about things that are strictly Triple H era creations, right? Because this is where the meat of the essay, of this video essay, which is turning out to be, is held, right? When Triple H took the reins, they made no gripes about it. The dumb fucks on the internet started calling it the new era weeks before WWE primed them. Then, Michael Cole, who is a beneficiary of the Triple H era because people are too stupid to use their eyes. People, and I need to do a side quick rant about this. People for the longest time thought that Michael Cole was shit at his job. Absolutely nothing has changed. Michael Cole is still shit at his job. But now that Vince McMahon left, people are flagrantly pretending that Michael Cole has gotten better. This is one of the biggest lies of all time. He has not gotten better. Oh, he's having fun. Yeah, he's having fun. That's not a good thing. Michael Cole making jokes about how Chelsea Green smells like shit for 3 weeks is not funny, number one, and it makes him look like a goof. That's why you need to have 2 announcers. The color commentator, Jerry the King Lawler, might say something like that. But the straight man, right, the play-by-play guy, JR, would never say that. JR would never say this person smells like shit. JR was like treating it like a real commentating job. That's why you have the King, and that's why the King is the greatest color commentator, and in my opinion, commentator of all time, and JR is a close second. And their team is by far the number 1, right? Michael Cole, we are told to believe, oh, he's having fun, he doesn't have Vince in his ear. Yeah, and he gets things wrong all the time now. I understand, Vince McMahon is never going to be bothered to know the difference between like a crescent kick and an enziguri. Nobody gives a shit. Vince McMahon doesn't care. You know what I mean? But Vince McMahon is going to tell you, now say this, say like, oh, Shane's going for it. Oh, Shane's going to get revenge on his father, or whatever the case may be, right? Michael Cole doesn't do those things anymore. Now, he does dumb shit. And he's a beneficiary of the Triple H era, if you will, because people don't scrutinize his imperfections anymore. They just kind of go with the flow, and they say, Michael Cole has gotten better. You can tell he's having fun. I don't give a shit if he's having fun. This is his job. He needs to do his job correctly. Oh, Michael Cole's having fun. That's why the company is going downhill, dumb fucks. That's why this last episode of SmackDown, this last episode of SmackDown is going to be one of the lowest drawing SmackDowns of all time, and it's going to be outdrawn by Jake Paul. I mean, I guess I should say Jake Paul than Mike Tyson, let's be real. It's not just Jake Paul, to be fair. But nevertheless, shit is going down the drain, motherfucks, and that's the reality that we find ourselves in. Meanwhile, we don't have to worry about that as long as Michael Cole is having fun doing his shit job. Now, with all this being said, once the Triple H era began, everything started being recontextualized. All of a sudden, Stephanie McMahon comes out, and she's like, it's the Paul Levesque era. This must have killed Vince McMahon. Think about this. Your daughter comes out, and now the business is no longer in the hands of the McMahons. It's now in the hands of Triple Cuck. Now, it is what it is. Triple H was handpicked by Vince, so maybe he's not that mad. But the reality is, here's the problem. They have to announce it to you as the Triple H era because they thought nobody would notice, but they were wrong. Which brings me to the ultimate point. The Triple H era has thus far been the worst era of all time. It is worse than the worst parts of the PG era by a significant factor. Okay? The reality is what the reality is. The Triple H era, WrestleMania is coming up. I know we've got some time, so I'm not gonna throw the towel in yet, but it's pretty much a done deal. Nothing has been built up at all, except for Gunther, which we already discussed, cucks. Everything else is exactly where it was. I'm not even sure if Finn Balor and JD McDonough are still the tag team champions because I haven't seen them on TV in a long time. I'm not sure. This is the first time in the hater's life where I'm not sure who the champions are. I usually have a pretty good idea of what's going on, even when I don't watch. Now I'm watching consistently, and I still don't know. Think about that. There was a point where I could tell you who the Intercontinental champions were, dating back to D'Lo Brown. Now I don't know. I don't know, and I don't care. Who is the Intercontinental? I'm sure I can think of it, but I need a moment. I'm thinking of it now as I'm talking to you, and I can't put my finger on who the IC champion is. It's not Gunther. It's Jey Uso. No, it's Braun Breaker, but we haven't seen him in weeks either. See what I'm saying? It's easy to forget because nothing fucking happens. And that is what the Triple H / Paul Levesque era can be marked by. It can be marked by nothing fucking happening, right? The Triple H era, it's a new era. It's a new era where nothing fucking happens. Triple H is in his 50s, so he's got a long way to go, motherfuckers. If he makes it to, let's say, 75, like Vince did essentially, right? To his 70s, being this guy, what's going to happen? 5 things? Because it's been about a year and nothing's happened so far. Absolutely nothing. We've had the 2 worst champions of all time, Cucky Rhodes and Gunther. I dare you to tell me 2 worst champions in WWE history that have been presented as real champions. Not Vince Russo, not Vince McMahon, not that kind of bullshit. I'm talking about real people that have been presented as champions that are worse. And the numbers don't lie. They're the worst and they draw the least, right? That's the reality. We're going to see real quick when the ratings come out How many people watched SmackDown? How many people watched Cody Rhodes, which might not even be there? And Gunther, right? When Mike Tyson, who is fucking almost 60, is on Netflix. You know what I mean? Think about that bull right there. Think about that bullshit, motherfucks. And that's what I'm getting at here. The Triple H era has been a complete disaster. And Triple H, as a booker, has shown that he doesn't understand the fundamentals of booking. The fact is this: not everything can be a long, protracted storyline where the same thing happens every fucking week. I'm actually getting angry as I say these things. This rant is not, I'm not putting this on. I'm actually pissed off because think about what the fucking Bloodline storyline is. It's literally, you start off with Roman Reigns comes back, and every couple of weeks, he recruits one other guy. Oh, Jimmy Uso's back. He's been recruited. Oh, Jey Uso has been recruited. Oh, Sami Zayn has been recruited. Aside from Jimmy, everybody else is going to say no first, then they're going to say yes. Who the fuck cares? All these guys should have been recruited in one episode of SmackDown. In one episode of SmackDown, it should have been like one segment. They recruit this guy. Next segment, they recruit this guy. Next segment, they recruit the next guy. This was a common thing back in the day. The more important storylines, and this is one thing that people don't understand. Back in the day, like let's say in the Attitude Era, there wasn't much in terms of long-term storylines, but the storylines were deeper, right? So nowadays, the storyline goes a little bit like this. Gunther and Cody Rhodes are going to wrestle for the Crown Stool title that in a meaningless match that not one person gives a flying fuck about. The winner of which is going to go out and shake hands with two dudes in chic outfits from Saudi Arabia and their wives, right? This thing doesn't need to be built. It's simple as that. Let Gunther do Gunther shit. Let Cody do Cody shit on SmackDown. And then the storyline can just culminate by itself at Crown Stool. It's not like a meaningful match. Oh, Cody Rhodes wants to do it for his daughter. I don't give a fuck. You know what I'm saying? Nobody cares at all. Now, here's the problem with this entire situation, right? In building up the storyline, we've forgotten about other things that these guys could be doing. And that's the difference between now and the Attitude Era. In the Attitude Era, Triple H was champion, right? And he would come out on Monday Night Raw. First of all, he would wrestle most days, most Mondays. But occasionally he wouldn't wrestle. There was one week where Triple H didn't wrestle on Monday, but he had a match on Sunday Night Heat against Bob Holly. Bob Holly just goes up to him backstage. He's like, I think I can beat you. Triple H says, no, you can't. Boom, match, Sunday Night Heat. Triple H pedigrees him, wins, right? Then Monday Night Raw starts. Triple H doesn't just go home. Triple H is there as the champion. He opens the show with a promo, right? It was obviously the subsequent Monday, but you understand what I'm getting at. He opens the show with a promo, right? Then he has like 5 or 6 backstage segments as champion. This is Triple H the champion. So he knows what this is all about. But he doesn't do it nowadays. Nowadays, you're lucky to see Cody Rhodes once. You might see him twice if they show him coming out of his stupid little bus. He just walks to the ring and he says, I'm Cody Rhodes, and I love everyone here, and then he leaves. And then people are like, oh, what great long-term booking. Yeah, it's not good long-term booking if the conversation between Cody Rhodes and Gunther takes 6 weeks to have. It's fucking one conversation. They spoke for a total of 15 minutes. This should be one segment, or if you must have multiple segments, do it all in one night. I'm not saying they both go to the ring every time, but maybe they meet each other backstage and they have a truncated version of one of their promos, right? This way you save time on the bullshit entrances, right? You save time on the presentations. You save time on a lot of things. This is how wrestling used to be. When Triple H was the champion, he would have segments, right? Like Christian and Edge would walk into the office, right? And they'd be like, we need a match. We want to wrestle like the Dudley Boys or something, right? And then Triple H would say, look, you know, you guys are not going to get your hands on like X-Pac and Road Dogg, but you can have the Dudleys tonight, right? Then Triple H would have his own segments, right? He was a character where a lot of shit would happen on any given episode of Monday Night Raw or SmackDown, and it would be centered around him. So like 6 weeks worth of promos would happen in one episode. And you'd have the same amount of matches, and they were like 5 minutes each. You see what I'm getting at here? That's the correct format of wrestling. Triple H is very familiar with this format, but he doesn't want to do it. The only reason I can think is that he doesn't want to make real stars, right? and which is understandable to some degree, and he wants to have control on who the stars are that are going to be made, right? It's nearly impossible for Braun Breaker to become a massive star that he could easily become if he gets 3 minutes of TV every week, and it's basically a promo with like Kathy Kelly or the new Kathy Kelly, and he's like, there's a lot of dogs here in like St. Louis, and then people bark, and he's like, I'm going to beat the next guy I'm going to fight. It's impossible, right? If that's all he gets that like 3 times a month, and he has one match against Jey Uso, how can he get over? It's impossible. The only people allowed to get over are the people that are given the time. And this is determined directly and only by Triple H. In addition, I couldn't have a rant against Triple H and his shitty little era without mentioning the fact that this asshole insists on putting himself in every big moment. No big moment can happen without Triple H being there. There were many, many times that Vince McMahon orchestrated big moments during his tenure, obviously. Vince McMahon was almost never present at any of the big moments. The only time Vince McMahon was present at the big moments were when he was part of the big moment as a character. He never showed up as the authority figure to just have big moments like Dana White does. You know what I mean? Triple H is a Dana White ripoff. Dana White puts the title around people's waist. Triple H puts the title around people's waist. Triple H makes a big announcement. Dana White makes a big announcement. Dana White has a press conference. Triple H has a press conference. What the fuck? Vince McMahon didn't need any of this bullshit because Vince McMahon was better at his job than Dana White, Triple H, and Tony Khan combined. This is the reality, right? Like Joe Rogan said on a recent episode, Dana White is the greatest promoter of all time. We all know that's bullshit. We all know it's obviously Vince. Dana White is a good promoter for real fights. Vince McMahon is an excellent promoter for fake shit. Some of the things that Dana White puts together, nobody needs to sell it to you. Like nobody needs to sell you John Jones versus anybody because he's undefeated. It sells itself. Vince McMahon is selling to you Matt Hardy versus Zach Gowen, a dude with one leg. No way that Dana White is better than Vince McMahon as a promoter. And Triple H is copying the wrong guy, which is even more ironic considering that the best promoter of all time is his father-in-law for whom he has worked for decades. What the hell are you doing? This is the problem. Triple H wants the spotlight. He knows, just like Dana White knows inherently, that they are not Vince McMahon. Brock Lesnar said it best. When Dana White talked some shit about wrestling, Brock Lesnar said, look, Dana White is a good promoter, but he's not Vince. He knows this. Just like Brock Lesnar said it, I'm saying it, right? Just like that. He's like, he knows he's not better than Vince, so he has to talk shit. Vince McMahon never talked shit about the UFC, and he could have, right? If Paul Heyman can talk shit about WWE, right? And New Jack can say, I'm the toughest guy in the world, when like a lightweight in the UFC would destroy him, rest in peace. You know what I'm saying? Like, the people can say these things. Vince McMahon never had to. He never even talked shit about WCW until he bought them. Vince McMahon let actions speak. Vince McMahon is another level. Triple H is not on that level. And instead of emulating Vince McMahon, he is doing everything he can in his power to do the opposite of what Vince McMahon did. But the problem, retards, is that this is wrestling. And the only person worth emulating is the only person, literally, in the history of the world that has had continued success with the medium of pro wrestling. There is only one. Oh, but Hater, what about Rikishoshi Hiratashi in New Japan? Nobody knows who the fuck owns New Japan, and they have not had massive success ever. They have Wrestle Kingdom, which is a big deal, right? Because that's pretty much all they have. All the other shows are in front of like 400 people. Now, the Hater went to Tokyo. There was a New Japan show, right? The next day, the Hater decided to just go out and have sake instead of going and watching this garbage, right? It was like a 300-seater. There was like 100 seats left. Like nobody gave a flying fuck. This is in Tokyo. You know what I'm saying? So don't get me started with that bullshit. The reality is that Triple H is emulating the wrong guy and cucks, and he is doing it specifically to say that I am different from Vince. That's what pisses me off the most. The idea that Triple H wants so desperately to have his own reign. He wants to leave his own mark. Instead of being happy to be a continuation of his mentor, Vince McMahon, Triple H wants to be different. But here's the problem. He is different in a bad way. The things that he does are boring. The things that Dana White does are boring. The only reason why the UFC is even a big deal, if we're being honest, and I don't want to hear all of the hardcore fans come after me, oh, what do you know about UFC? I've watched since UFC 1, motherfuckers. Me and my buddies would rent the tapes at Blockbuster. Don't tell me I know everything about UFC. If it weren't for Conor McGregor, and to a lesser extent, Ronda Rousey, nobody would still give a fuck about the UFC. Let's be real. Before Conor McGregor, nobody cared about the UFC. It wasn't mainstream in the slightest. You had to call bars and ask, hey, are you guys showing UFC? And they would listen to you and they'd say, what the fuck is UFC? People didn't even know what it was. And I'm here since day one, motherfuckers. Since day one. There's two moments in UFC history that matter. Conor McGregor and the Ultimate Fighter Season 1 finale. If it weren't for those two moments, UFC would be like on the level of Bellator, where you can ask anybody who's the Bellator champion, and they're gonna say, what is that? Is that a ballerina federation? That's what it sounds like up in this bitch. That's why, like, bare knuckle FC is rising up, because it's exciting shit. It's cool shit. So that's what I'm getting at. Vince McMahon represents cool. Triple H represents lame. And this is intolerable, especially considering that at one point in the 90s, Triple H was one of the coolest people of all time, right? Triple H himself is not entertaining. But Triple H, with better, more charismatic people next to him, like Shawn Michaels and Road Dogg Jesse James, and even X-Pac and Billy Gunn to a certain extent, is one of the best. DX is one of the greatest things that ever has happened in American entertainment history. And the same guy that would stand in the middle of the ring and say, let's get ready to suck it. That same guy now comes out with 7 bracelets on one wrist, 8 bracelets on the other. He shakes hands with a Sheik, and then he shakes hands with Liv Morgan and gives her a goofy-ass title that only a retard could think looked good. This is the downfall of Triple H, and this has been the Triple H Mega Rant. Cuck olds.